Well, good morning, everyone. As ever, it's absolutely terrific to see you all. Always keep in mind that our events are always recorded, so if you're happy about being seen on screen, you'll know what to do. But it's always great to see so many of you here and to identify. I think I know everybody today as well. You've all been before, so doubly welcome. Anyone who is new, and I recognize all the names, you're very welcome as well, of course. We meet every second Tuesday in the month, or it normally is. And today it's another enthralling talk from a charity I'd never ever heard of, the Sandpiper Trust. So Lorna Duff is the person in charge of it, and she's going to let you know all about the work she does to fund volunteers who respond very quickly to any medical emergency when and where they're needed. So Lorna, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk about Sandpiper today. It's lovely to just be able to share a little bit about what we do and how we do it. I'm going to start today by just sharing a quick video that should give an idea of what we do. And I think it'll give you a flavour before I start whittering on about the finer details. So I will just see if I can share this with you now. Now, can everybody see my screen share? Let's see if this works. I hope that gave an overview of what we do with our one of our very game medical advisors, who is a GP in Dufftown. Oh, excuse me, let me get rid of that. Sorry. Yes, so the Sandpiper Trust was founded 20 years ago following the death of 14-year-old Sandy Dixon. His parents and aunt tried to turn his death into something more positive and thought that if their son had died because of an accident in a remote and rural area and because of no medical assistance being readily available, how could they do something to prevent this happening to other families? They had a chance encounter with Professor Colville Laird, who at that time had set up Basics Scotland, who were training remote and rural GPs at that point to form a response network. So it was a very serendipitous meeting, and the Sandpiper Trust was born to equip these medical responders who were volunteering in their own time in remote and rural Scotland. At that point, it was really only GPs that were part of the network, but over the 20 years that has broadened out. We now have advanced nurse practitioners and paramedics throughout remote and rural Scotland who undergo additional training by Basics Scotland and then get equipped with a defibrillator and a Sandpiper bag by Sandpiper. And the Sandpiper bag contains many, many bits of equipment that could be potentially life-saving in an emergency. All of our responders have airwave radios or VLS smartphones so that they log in to main control at Scottish Ambulance Service. They're then visible on a screen, and any 999 call that comes in can see that resource and contact them and locate the accident or the medical emergency and send them to it. And obviously in remote and rural Scotland, sometimes the lead times on ambulances arriving are long. So if we've got somebody local who can get there much quicker and start that treatment, hold the fort until the ambulance service arrives, then that can make a very real difference. We've also got many remote and rural GP practices that we call fixed resources, who essentially offer this same service during their opening hours. So at any point of their opening hours, they're actually logged into Scottish Ambulance and can be called at any point because they will have a Basics trained Sandpiper equipped GP who can attend something in their immediate area. We are getting to the point now where we're trying to do a big contact exercise post-COVID to make sure that people are still able to respond. It's been a very difficult year for responders because they are all frontline clinicians who've all been very involved in the pandemic. The majority of them have kept responding, which is phenomenal. There have been logistical challenges with getting everybody face fit tested and Tyvek suits that fit and FFP3 masks and everything, so that anytime they go out, they've got appropriate safety equipment for themselves. But actually Scottish Ambulance Service were great at letting us feed into their logistics network to access some of the face fit testing. So it's been a challenging year, but we still have, I think at the last count last week, 203 fully active responders. A few people who are just not quite ready to get back to it, but that's because their frontline jobs have been incredibly demanding. And we're optimistic that once we get past this, we will have some new recruits on board as well. We're getting back at Basics Scotland to actually delivering the pre-hospital emergency care course. So that will help, because without that, people can't become a responder. We have had a project in Grampian that you may or may not have come across called Sandpiper Wildcat, which was a specific project to deal with community responders rather than clinical responders. The outcomes for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in Grampian were very poor compared to other areas of the country. So 6 years ago, Sandpiper started quite a large project to set up a network in Grampian of community responders who were trained in CPR, carried a defib, and were all across Grampian in the villages where they were most needed. Sandpiper have actually handed that project on to Scottish Ambulance Service, which is a good thing. It was always going to have a shelf life for us because of the cost of it as it grew. It cost the best part of £1 million, which for a very small charity has been, you know, a big amount of resource. So we wanted to get that to a point where it was strong enough for Scottish Ambulance to be interested in taking it on, which they've done. Unfortunately, in the pandemic, all community cardiac responders were stood down because of safety concerns, but they are beginning to get that cohort back to refresher training. They're beginning to re-engage them, and they're also looking at rolling the project out in Dumfriesshire. So although Sandpiper are no longer involved in that, it's a great legacy for us that is going to continue. And the Wildcat responders in Grampian have rather sweetly opted to keep the name Wildcat. So while they're no longer Sandpiper Wildcats, they are SAS Wildcats, which is also quite a nice, just a nice little legacy. So again, because of the pandemic, the research papers that we were hoping would be finished and published through Edinburgh University are not quite at a point where they can be published, but we're getting there slowly but surely. Again, all my research crew are frontline A&E staff, so they have not had huge amounts of time, unfortunately, to get it all sorted, but we are there. We are scrunching data from it, and there's some really good findings from that. I think another legacy of the Sandpiper Wildcat project is that we've got much better at collecting and using data at Sandpiper in general, because although it can be the sort of slightly duller part of the job, it's vital to inform our sort of next steps and even to look at what equipment is being used. We're actually just about to provide every responder with a Sandpiper branded drugs pouch that will have a bespoke set of drugs in it. In the past, we've used the Scottish Ambulance Service combi pouch, but we've realised from the patient report forms that it wasn't quite fulfilling what we needed. So we are going to still, thankfully, be able to source the drugs through Scottish Ambulance, but we will have them now in a physical Sandpiper branded drugs pouch that will sort of tie in with the Sandpiper bag. So yes, it's a very fascinating job. I'm only 2 days a week with Sandpiper, and we're a very streamlined crew. There is only me. We've got founding trustees who are still involved and engaged, although beginning to want a little bit more of a back seat as grandchildren appear. And, you know, so it's a fascinating job, and you get to meet some incredibly interested and passionate people. One of the things I think we slightly suffer from in terms of publicity is that, unlike things like the Scottish Charitable Air Ambulance, generally people who have been treated by one of our responders don't necessarily know about it. And they're certainly not at a point when they are being treated where we could ethically ever say, oh, hello, I'm actually a basic Sandpiper responder. Would you like to see my bag of kit worth about £3,000 that's all funded by charity? So we do sometimes suffer from that side of not getting patient stories. We will know a patient's name, but follow-up can be difficult. And again, ethically, if someone if someone's had quite a traumatic cardiac arrest or road traffic accident, they don't necessarily want to be contacted out of the blue 3 months later to say, this is who we are and we think we might have helped you. So we do rely on the communities that know that they've got our responders working within them to do a bit of publicity and fundraising for us. So, you know, that's a sort of constant battle in a way, and we are always getting newspapers saying, oh, you must be able to give us a sort of gory story with a happy ending, but that's not really what we do, and we wouldn't really want to get into that, particularly as we still have an awful lot of doctors who are responders, and you know, that simply goes against the grain with them. We are lucky that our responders are so self-effacing and just do what they do in their own time and don't want publicity and don't want any of the glory. But we do know from the data from Scottish Ambulance, who we meet with regularly, that our responders make a big, big difference to improving patient outcomes in remote and rural Scotland. We're really pleased that the Sandpiper model is being properly rolled out now as Sandpiper Australia, which is not something that we have anything to do with in terms of funding, but the doctor who has set that up approached Sandpiper a couple of years ago to say that he felt the model would be ideal for Australia, which has many of the same challenges because of its remote and rural nature. And I now work really closely with him on the governance side of things, and also just we're about to, well, we have just hit the green light on an order of 500 new Sandpiper bags, empty bags. So 150 are going to Australia because they have fundraised for that, and we will keep 350 here. So we do a lot of cross work with them, which is great. It's been really, really informative. So that's all good, and you know, we're always keen for there to be Sandpiper somewhere exotic, because it shows the model works, and you know, while every location would need to tweak it a little bit, I think it's a great legacy. I have actually, I know this is very difficult on Zoom compared to face to face, I have got an empty Sandpiper bag here. You probably saw it in the video. They are fairly large rucksack type items that come apart into two separate bags if needed to make them a little more maneuverable, but they are very, very sort of ergonomically designed. Chris Tyzo of Tyzo's Outdoor Shops actually took one look at the original Mark I Sandpiper bag. I believe they were doing a fundraiser at St Andrews University, and he went up to the founding trustees years ago and said, I like what you're doing, but your bag's rubbish. And they sort of were a little bit taken aback, but it was a great brick of a thing. And he said, no one wants to take that out the boot of a car. And some of your guys are you know, having to take this kit quite far off road. Let me design a much, much better bag for you. So we haven't changed the design since, actually, because it works. The front bag can be unzipped. That has all the airway management stuff in it. So if you knew that was definitely what was needed and nothing else, you could take the front bit and your oxygen cylinder. But it's amazing what fits in that, in a series of little pouches that are all very clearly labeled, so that people can instantly get their kit. And in theory, anyone that's trained with a Sandpiper bag could see a Sandpiper bag somewhere, know exactly what's in it, and be able to use it in an emergency, because the kit should be standardized. So yes, but each bag at the minute, the setup costs for each responder with the bag, the equipment, the defibrillator, and the vehicle location tracker smartphone system is just over £3,000. So it's a reasonable investment in each person, but worth it. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, on you go, Ruth. We can't quite hear you.
Sorry, I think that's it now, yeah. Having worked in the neonatal unit and seen the neonatal response team going out to emergencies, I can vouch, having seen similar bags and how they unzip and everything is in it, what a wonderful resource they are, but also how inordinately heavy they are for the person having to carry them. So I can't imagine having to go off-road with them, but you know, what a fantastic thing they must be for those who are doing it. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we're very lucky actually. We do a tie-in at Basic Scotland with training the responders through the Scotty midwives. So we do obstetric emergencies and neonatal resus, and have a specific training day for that in our core skills portfolio. So while we don't have masses of obstetric kit in the bag, we've kind of got enough to see us through, and we do have some tiny peds stuff now, because particularly on the islands it can be a big consideration, and it is one of those things which you'll probably know, that anyone that's not used to obstetrics or neonatal stuff, it's one of the huge red flags. It's the things our responders always say, please, please, you know, I need more training. It's the one thing that just panics me. I think they, you know, they look at tiny people and are worried they're going to break them. So we do quite a lot of pediatric and neonatal training, because it's always an area where people lack confidence. Apart from our few, we've got a few pediatric intensivists on the team who are great, but for the majority, the pediatric and neonatal stuff does scare them a bit. So we do try to, you know, increase their confidence, and yes, it's amazing. We actually, at Basic Scotland, our partner charity, we've been doing a series of podcasts throughout lockdown, and I think one of our most listened to ones was normal delivery in the community, because again, even if it's an ordinary delivery, if our responders are called to it because there's no one else around, it does always cause a little bit of alarm. So that's been a great resource as well.
Can I also just ask, how do your volunteers come to you? Do you ask people in certain areas, or do they just think?
We are quite well known in the remote and rural medical community, and we're quite well known through Scottish Ambulance Service. So quite a lot of our responders now are paramedics. There are various criteria for the amount of pre-hospital experience they have. We do have quite a lot of responders who are also in the retrieval service as part of their job. So the ScotStar and EMRS crew, quite a lot of them respond for us as well. The lead paramedic on the charity air ambulance is one of our responders. They all have to undergo the Basic Scotland Pre-Hospital Emergency Care course, which is affiliated with the Royal College of Surgeons Faculty of Pre-Hospital Care. So that's an accredited course. They must have done that to be considered, and then they apply to be a responder, and we do a very informal interview with them now, which is more just to manage expectations on both sides, because from a governance perspective at Sandpiper, we need to know that if we are equipping people with that amount of stuff, that they will log on, you know, at various points and be an additional resource, and not just have the bag in the boot of their car, because we have to know when it's being used. And, you know, if Scottish Ambulance Service don't have it as an available resource, then we're not making best use of it. But that said, we do still, some of our responders will also use their bag for things like medical cover for the local shinty league and that sort of thing, which we've got absolutely no problem with at all, because it's still providing resilience in areas that need it. Yes, so it's partly they come to us, and partly on a FEC course, we do a bit of Sandpiper propaganda, and some of them say, ah, yes, okay, I'm quite interested in that. So a bit of both.
Thank you, thanks.
On you go, Anne.
Thinking of the logistics of these supplies, that some of them will need replacing or updating. I always, my dim and distant first aid course, remember how stringent they were about throwing things out if I'd had them so long, even bandages and things. the logistics and costs of keeping the bags fully equipped and up to date must be quite challenging.
Yes, it is. We've actually developed a responders app for their phones that now they can put all their equipment into that. So it's a sort of you know, block an evening and sit and put all your equipment in your app with its, I was going to say best before date. That's not quite what it's called. Your expiry date,
Yeah.
and then the app will automatically order that equipment from us. It'll send me, I just get an email automated form pinged in saying, you know, name and address, and listing the equipment that's about to expire so that I can place an order, get it to them, and hopefully most of the time that's fairly seamless. It does rely on the responders putting the equipment and dates in the app in the first place. But I think we've got them quite well trained now to use the app. And obviously then if they're called out to a job and they use something, there is a form that they fill in requesting replacements, although sometimes the ambulance crew will replace their equipment out of the back of the ambulance, depending on how well they're stocked. Because we're essentially responding on behalf of the ambulance service, sometimes we do get replenishments from them directly into a responder's bag. But every job they go to, they have to fill out a patient report form, and that shows me what drugs and equipment they've used, because it's another thing with the drugs pouches that's been slightly challenging, and anyone that's worked in the NHS probably knows this, but if one drug expires in a drugs pouch, you can't replace that one drug. The entire pouch has to go back to NHS Pharmaceuticals, and it can then be quite a slow turnaround to get a replacement pouch sent out. And for the jobs that our folk are going to, they need fairly advanced analgesia and things. It's not really okay to turn up with a bottle of Calpol. So that's been a challenge, and we're hoping that our bespoke pouches will actually allow for a slightly more sensible, less wasteful replenishment process. But until they arrive and I get them in the Tayside Pharmaceuticals system next month, we're not entirely sure. So yeah, that's a work in progress. And there is, you know, one of the things, particularly in this day and age, is there's a terrible amount of waste with medical equipment. So while we don't hold people to this, if stuff has just expired, we do say either if out of the goodness of their hearts they would like to post it down to me, that would be great, because I give it to Basics Scotland and they use it for training equipment. I've also got links to the medical faculties throughout Scotland, because the students are always wanting equipment that they can play with and familiarise themselves with. So we do try our best to make sure that it at least then gets used for training and isn't just thrown into landfill literally unopened. Our older Sandpiper bags as well, the ones that there was absolutely nothing wrong with, I was a bit horrified that some of those were sort of going in a skip. So we do, unfortunately, this is on hold, much to people in the office's horror, because I now have a cupboard stacked full of old empty Sandpiper bags. But I managed to forge a link with First Aid Africa. One of the lead paramedics at SAS has links there, and he very kindly organised a shipment of our old Sandpiper bags out to First Aid Africa. And it was great to see them getting a second life. We didn't send equipment out because that gets complicated, but we do know that at least the bags are being used. So we do what we can to minimise the waste, but yeah, there's a lot that needs to change, I think, across the board from the manufacturers of medical equipment, but it's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask something else, please?
Yes, carry on, Anne. Yes.
Obviously, fundraising is a big issue for you. Do you have any local events or anything coming up near Aberdeen?
Well, we're still hoping to have various people in Ride the North, although it is changing by the minute. Neil that runs it has had to really, what's the dreadful word, pivot like nothing on earth to try and ensure that something happens with Ride the North. We normally have quite a big team of folk up there. We won't have so many this year, particularly actually because normally a lot of our responders do it. But this year, a lot of them are struggling with leave and things, and I think are needing to put their feet up a little bit actually, and just not necessarily be doing everything at 100 miles an hour. But we will have various riders in Ride the North. We've managed to roll over our London Marathon place, which is always quite a big fundraiser for us, which was meant to be last year. We've managed to roll that into next year. And it'll be Ben Price, one of our medical advisors, who was in that video. He will be running that, which is great. And he's one of these sort of sickening people who seems to run up mountains, you know, before he does surgery in the morning. So he'll be fantastic. We still need to work out how we're going to kit him out and whether we can make him run with a Sandpiper bag, or whether that's just too cruel. So yes, I mean, it's a shame because there are normally far more small local events happening. And at the minute, a lot of organisers have pulled the plug, even on quite small things, because they just haven't been able to, you know, fill out all the paperwork and guarantee safety and social distancing and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So we're very much hoping that 2022 will see a transformation and us properly getting back to normal with this sort of thing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Libby, your hand is up.
Well, it's really going back to basics, Lorna. If you could just remind me the procedure of contacting the responder. If I have an accident out in the back of Beyond, what happens? Somebody phones, is it the ambulance or the police? And then what happens again?
You would dial 999. You would ask for ambulance when you're asked which service you require. The call handler at Scottish Ambulance Service triages your call. So they ask you a series of key questions to ascertain how they code that call. It's all color coded at the minute. And from the color, there's an algorithm that dictates, well, from your answers, actually, there's an algorithm that dictates what color of call that is. If it's a red or a purple, and they have this amazing map in front of them. So they locate the call, even if you can't tell them where you are, they can track. I think we were talking about this recently. They can track now something like 99.8% of mobile phone calls within 20 seconds to within 100 meters of where the call is taking place. So the technology has come on in leaps and bounds, even in remote and rural Scotland. And they can then look on their board and they will see a basics responder with a Sandpiper bag. They can see whether they're in that location, and Scottish Ambulance Service will call them and say, this is an incident, this is where it is. It's so tech heavy now. They basically ping something to the VLS phone called Copilot, and Copilot is a navigation tool that Scottish Ambulance Service have and our guys have on their VLSs. So that then shows them the immediate location and guides them to it if they need it. Occasionally, if there is a situation where there's just going to be a very long time for an ambulance crew to get there, sometimes our resources will be called for a yellow call, which is non-life-threatening, but because they tend to want to, you know, provide resilience in their local community, most of them are happy to attend those calls. But it's very clever, the system of algorithms and triaging. I think the call handlers at Scottish Ambulance Service probably don't get enough praise in the whole system. It's an incredibly demanding job. I've been to Newbridge to the control centre, and it seems very calm, but my goodness, there are literally kind of life or death decisions being made each and every minute. It's terrifying if you think about it too long and unpick it. There are various things happening at Scottish Ambulance Service that should make the tasking of our team a bit easier. We've now been sort of allocated within Scottish Trauma Network. We are deemed to be a yellow trauma response team, which is doubly confusing because the Scottish Trauma Network have come up with their own series of colours that doesn't correspond to the Scottish Ambulance Service one. So we are a full trauma team, which means, you know, that we can be called to some quite serious things. And in fact, what we're hoping is going to happen is that we will start being tasked by the new trauma desk, which deals with all the critical care paramedics in Scotland. But there's been a lot of change at Scottish Ambulance Service that unfortunately went on hold during the pandemic, but we are beginning to get back to sorting that out. And that will be of benefit, I think. It'll stop the times when maybe recently sometimes a basics responder hasn't been called because the call handler hasn't been quite sure what their capabilities are. So it's internal education, as they've had huge staff changes themselves. But yes, in an emergency, always call 999. And that's why we're happy to pay the money to have the vehicle location system tapped into Scottish Ambulance Service control, because that means that you're not having to try and call a different number or anything like that. It should all be a seamless part of the same process.
So if when the responder's been contacted, do they stay in contact with the ambulance service when they're en route?
Yes.
Yes.
And they can also call the trauma desk if they get there and feel that they need a sense check or some backup.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going to be on their own for a while. There will always be an ED trauma consultant now manning the trauma desk for support and advice, particularly for basics responders who are responding on their own. Because ordinarily an ambulance crew will always be 2 people. Sometimes a basics resource will be called as well in situations where it's 2 technicians on an ambulance rather than any fully qualified paramedics. That's happening more and more in remote and rural Scotland because they can't get the paramedics to cover. And while technicians are brilliant, there's a lot that they are not allowed to do because it's out with their scope of practice. So frequently then a basics responder would be called to manage the more major interventions and possibly travel into hospital in the ambulance, administering treatment on the way in. So there's a number of slightly different scenarios when we would be called.
Lorna, I think that's all the questions. I'll just check the screen again. It is. Probably, as ever, thank you very much for your questions, group. That's excellent. I'm utterly amazed, actually, at the work you managed to do as a charity. And it all seems to go through you, Lorna. You are the only person who really runs the organization.
Yes, I mean, but I'm hugely lucky that, you know, actually the responders are fantastic at spreading the word. You know, they provide so much of the clinical input. So, you know, thankfully it's not just left to me to decide, you know, what equipment goes in the bag. It's all very driven by the data and by the responders. And I'm very, very lucky that actually Sandpiper works so closely with their partner charity Basics Scotland, because that provides a great team. Overall, Basics themselves are still fairly small. There are only 4 full-time members of staff there, but that, you know, that's been a big boost. And I think getting the charities to really work hand in hand has benefited the responders and the patients. So we do have a dedicated responder support project that I got up and running last year that's part funded by Sandpiper and part funded by Scottish Trauma Network. And so, yeah, that gives me someone at Basics who is the responder support administrator. She's a former nurse, pediatric nurse, and she's fantastic too. So it's great because I do feel part of, you know, a small tight-knit team, which is great. So no, it's definitely not just me in that sense, but yeah, it's busy, which is good.
And I suppose with all charities, great to know that the money that is being raised on behalf of Sandpiper is going to train the people who are obviously dedicated, they're all volunteers and trained by you to help out when required. So it's a wonderful service.
Yes, and thankfully, I think, you know, we can show that really the majority of donations go straight into the equipment and the training, and our overheads are pretty small. So we aim to keep it that way.
One last question. What in fact is the next challenge?
Now, I'm not sure that even still happens. It was, now, is it near Bankery? This is terrible, you see, because I'll be shown up for being a central belter. It was one of our founding trustees, Claire Maitland, was very involved in the Dinesh Challenge, and I think there was running and shooting and all sorts of things went on, but it hasn't happened. Now, it hasn't happened for a while, but it might have been one of these ones that was only every 3 years. And sadly, the Lanrick Challenge doesn't look as though that's going to happen again either, which part of me says thank goodness, because it was a marathon to organise, and we felt that we were relying very heavily on the same lovely volunteers every year, and that possibly we were well, we didn't want to stretch our goodwill down here. So I think we will need to come up with something new and something different for 2022 or 23. But we'll need to think what form that could take and how we can keep it quite inclusive. So yes, we're always open to suggestions and ideas for these sorts of things.
Right, Lorna, that's been absolutely great. You've definitely raised our awareness about the work of your trust. And I want to thank you on behalf of the group for your wonderfully clear delivery and enthusiasm you obviously have for what you do. So thank you very much indeed for all preparation you've gone into and for delivering a very, very good talk.
Thank you so much. And if you want to sort of see anything else about us, we have got a new website, which thankfully we've managed to get up and running during COVID, make good use of the time. So Sandpiper Trust, do have a look, you know, and it's as much about raising awareness as raising funds. So if you've got friends and relatives in remote and rural Scotland that you think would just benefit from knowing that we're out there doing what we do, please don't feel that we're always coming cap in hand. You know, awareness raising is as much a part of it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Group, I thought great talk. We're running back to sort of a locally based one on the 6th of July. It's a bit away. It's Jay Thomas, who is the Youth Engagement Officer for the West End Church's cluster group, and he's going to report really on the work he's been undertaken since he was appointed. So it really is about the Thrive Youth Project, which you may have heard a little bit about, but Jay will go into a lot of depth and describe the various really excellent initiatives he's been working on since his time with us. So I look forward again to seeing you all on the 6th of July.
Thank you.
All stay safe. Bye for now.